Oxford United scrape past Milton Keynes in the FA Cup on penalties, Matt Ingram being the hero, but the U's are in to the next round. That, a new signing and a new manager on this episode of Walking the London Road. Connor is back with us. Connor, you made the smart decision to be in somewhere nice and warm for our Friday night trip to MK. Was it as diabolical to listen to as it was to watch?
It sounded absolutely horrific on the pitch, but off the pitch, the commentary was a lot more entertaining with a Mr. Carl Robinson saying it as many fans would do with a fan's eye, which was nice and refreshing.
Definitely. Heard a couple of clips of that, and yeah, it seems like KR was on top form. And obviously, his side's game got called off the day before, which, if we can keep that up, footballing authorities make it so we've got at least a couple of hours, not just fucking 2 or 14 fucking minutes like Hull did the other week. Anyway, we've been over that. So in this episode, like I said, we're going to touch very briefly on the MK game because, like we already hinted at, it was shit. And we're also, obviously, there's some other bigger stories to talk about surrounding our football club. So I thought it's very similar to the Colchester game in the Cup last year in the sense of League Two side, and instead of raising their level, I thought we dropped our level to match them. We were shocking, Matt Ingram with the best performance he's had in Oxford United shirt so far, Connor.
Yeah, I think with MK Dons, on paper, they have the best side in the league. Like, a lot of them are easy League One players. I think you can make the case that maybe even a couple of Championship. However, at the end of the day, it's still a League Two team, and they're 5th in League Two. And if a neutral who didn't know anything about football was looking at the game, you'd say that MK Dons were probably in a higher position than Oxford were, because, as you say, we just made it so easy for them, and it was actually it wasn't quite embarrassing. It was really embarrassing for a good 45 minutes or so.
Yeah. It's quite poetic, isn't it, that the MK goal comes from a set piece, something which we've been really bad at defending all season in the league, with a rather unorthodox set piece routine from Paul Warne's side.
Yeah. It's kind of what Paul Warne does. He just pulls anything out of his backside. But yeah, and Aaron Collins as well. We apart from one famous game at Wembley, he's always been a nemesis. Whether he was at Bristol Rovers or he's been at Bolton, always against us. He always seems to show up.
And he could have had a hat trick in that game. Some of the chances he had. Obviously, Will Lancashire gets the equaliser.
Set piece FC, throw in FC, know, right? Back again.
But it was quite unfortunate that I think it was just before MK scored, Jamie Donnelly went off with... we were kind of confused in the moment. So it's been reported that it's a concussion. There's also seems to be a minor shoulder injury. Not heard too much more on Jamie's condition, but he is at least, was able to walk off pitch under his own power, because in the moment we were very much, stood around thinking this doesn't look good at all.
Yeah, I actually haven't seen any clips online, or there was no clips of that incident on the replays on YouTube and such. But it's very Oxford United, isn't it? Signing a cracking player, and he has to go off injured after 20 odd minutes. But yeah, hopefully that he's all right and if he's conscious, and hopefully he'll be out for no more than a few weeks at most.
Obviously the minimum for a concussion is, I think, 2 weeks. So we know he's out for a minimum of a fortnight. Obviously, there was a decent showing from another one of our new additions that we'll talk about in a moment. In extra time, I thought we could have scored, not just from our new signing, but there was also an effort from Ole Romane, which was really a decent effort and well saved by the MK keeper. I think Krastev also had a pretty decent opportunity. But, when the penalties were just about to begin, we kind of, obviously, in that moment, you're very worried and all that kind of stuff. But in hindsight, we were chatting, and we can't think of the last time that we lost a penalty shootout.
That's a good that's a that's a good brain teaser. I'm trying. Yeah, actually, yeah, I'm trying to think as well. So I think back to 2019-20, and there was a few penalty shootouts, and I think we won all of those. The famous ones being Sunderland and Portsmouth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time we lost one. It might be, would it have been under like Clotet or Appleton? But either way, yeah, that's a good brain teaser. I'll think about that one. But also, Sam, I think it's. Go on.
I'm just thinking. I've got a feeling it might have been in the Pizza Street Motors Cup thing. I think it was. I've got a feeling it might have been the relegation or the near relegation season. I think it might have been in that one. But anyway, what were we going to say?
I was going to say, I think it's worth mentioning. It was nice to see Brannigan and Matt Phillips back on the pitch.
Yeah,
coming back from injury.
Definitely. Brannigan, you could tell that Cam wasn't fully back up to his old self in terms of physicality of the game. Matt Phillips, it was a relatively brief cameo, and obviously he stepped up and took one of the deciding penalties. So good to have some bodies back in those areas of the pitch.
Yeah, it's nice to get some players back from injuries. I mean, like we've known that like the lack of depth in midfield has been a bit of a worry this season. So hopefully get a few more bodies in, ship a few more out, and then get a few more in, because our squad's getting quite bloated, especially with players that we're recording from loans. So we'll have to see what goes on.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of players being recalled from loan, we theorised that he would be the first one out the door on last week's pod, but it's been confirmed that Luke Harris has gone back to Fulham after making just, I think it was 12 appearances in an Oxford United shirt. 1 goal, of course, against Middlesbrough. We spoke about him in the context of the other loanees last week, Connor, but just give your kind of thoughts on Luke Harris's time at the club.
I'm disappointed it didn't work out, and I think it's a bit of a shame it didn't work out because, when he came in, there was a bit of a mixed reaction. Where did he come? Was it from Birmingham City? Was that last season?
Yes.
Or wherever, saying that he didn't really shine much in League One. How's he going to shine much in the Championship? But I think when a lot of Yellows fans, they thought, okay, like he's sort of highly at Fulham, obviously like a nice established Premiership club. But for one reason or another, it just hasn't worked out. And if it's not working, and then both clubs have agreed to take him back and more likely go out on loan somewhere else this season, it just works well for all parties.
Yeah, like I say, it's a real shame because I thought the talent was there from Luke Harris. His work rate was solid, but in this situation we find ourselves in, you can't be carrying bodies isn't the right term, but there can't be any excess question marks is probably the best way to put it in the matchday squads. They've got to be players that, especially in this position we're in, that can come on and impact a game, which unfortunately at this point in his career Luke Harris is not.
Yeah, unfortunately, he's still only a young lad, so I'm sure that he'll take this and he'll maybe not cherish the experience, but he'll value the experience that he's gained. He's from one season he's been fighting for promotion, and now he's been battling in the doldrums against relegation. But as I say, I'm sure they all go out on loan again to probably another Championship club this season.
To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes on a permanent to a League One side, just given that, according to Transfermarkt, his contract is up at the end of the season, as we noted when he initially signed for the club. And, you can see when players go out on those, they've had a number of loans in succession, that it's tricky for them to make a solid foundation for themselves in football. So a permanent move would probably be the best thing for Luke Harris, for his career, for his own kind of situation, to have a solid, foundations.
Do you know if he was Do you know if he was recalled or if we sent him back? I was trying to read the wording and it seemed very ambiguous.
So the wording was that he'd been recalled, but I imagine it was kind of a mutual termination of the loan, given that obviously we'd signed Jamie Donnelly a couple of days before, and I'm sure it was kind of a mix of Fulham weren't happy with the lack of game time he was getting, and Knox were like, well, we've got this new player we want to assign to Luke Harris's squad registration spot.
Yeah, that's fair enough then.
Now, one in, one out in this week. Oxford United have signed another youngster from a Premier League team. We bought in Miles Peart-Harris from Brentford. A little bit of confusion about this when it first broke on Friday afternoon. But the transfer it's a free transfer from Brentford, and he has got a 6-month contract. He only had 6 months left at the G-Tech Community Stadium, and Paris comes in, and obviously he had a pretty decent showing against MK. From your perspective, as obviously our resident EFL expert, Connor, your thoughts on Miles Peart-Harris, because he's had a couple of spells on the EFL, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's had a couple loan spells in the EFL. He's had 2 in League one with Forest Green Rovers when they went down, I think, as one of the worst League One teams ever. But, that doesn't say much about him. And then also at Portsmouth during their League One Championship winning season, where he played more in a 10 role. I don't really think he was effective as he could be when he's playing out wide. I thought that when he came on, or the reports were that when he came on, you can speak more to this than I can because you were there, that our performance seemed to elevate when he was on the pitch.
Yeah.
And that we seemed to play with a bit more attacking intent, and there was a bit more freedom to our play, which is always a good sign, albeit against a League Two team. But as we were saying, it's a very good League Two team and probably one of the best on paper. And as you said, it wasn't a loan deal; it was a permanent deal. And he was at Swansea City, and he had a decent run, but sent back to Brentford, and he's only played 1 minute of football this season. So it might well be that he's, if we get relegated, and he's played 6 months, 5-6 months of good football, getting minutes in his legs, and he chips in with a fair amount of assists and a couple goals, that he might put himself back in the shop window for a lot of clubs, either in the Championship or maybe even in the Premier League. And if we stay up, you never know, there might be the option there for a nice contract as a Championship club.
Mm-hmm. Obviously came through the Chelsea youth ranks. So on his time, particularly at Swansea, I reached out to Jake of Pure SCFC Vlogs to get his take on Peart-Harris's time in South Wales. And he's echoed some of what you have said there, Connor. He's versatile, plays a 10, mainly on the wing, but also operated as sort of a shadow striker for Swansea. He's tall, not very quick, but his physicality and his ability on the ball was a real upside when he was playing for Swansea. He chipped in with a couple of goals and assists. I think it was 3 goals and 4 assists. A couple of match winners in there, though his spell was cut short with a number of injuries towards the end of the campaign, so Brentford recalled him. There was, you saw in the comments of the Twitter post that Brentford put up that with their side of their write-up of the deal, and you saw a couple of Swansea fans were a bit gutted that he hadn't gone back. So although it's very much in the auction night vein of a player who's had a couple of injury issues in his past, it's another case of a very, very talented wide man who's had pretty decent appraisals from his former clubs.
Yeah, such a Carl Robinson signing, by the way. Big, strong winners. I love my wingers. But yeah, I think overall, like the past 7 days, the transfer business that we've done on paper has actually been pretty good. So like at the moment, Ed's keeping his job at the moment, and I think fans are quieting down a little bit. But it's a good start. Both Jamie Donnelly and Peart-Harris, if I butchered his name. So I'm convinced that at some point Mark Harris is going to go out and we'll get maybe another striker in. But and also we as you say, desperately need to get in a 6 as well, which would be nice. So hopefully it's first of a few more to come.
In terms of Miles Harris, that now makes 24 of a 25-man squad, according to those on Twitter that kind of keep track of these kind of things. All 5 of our loan spots in registration are currently filled up. Now, like I say, the squad number is likely to go down with further reports and speculation about the future of Siriki Dembele, Shemi Poheta, like you say, Mark Harris, Tom Bradshaw, being the most prominent of those with links out of the football club. There is also obviously the long-term injury to Tyler Goodrum, so whether the club see that and go, Tyler's not going to be fit for the rest of the campaign, so we can remove him out of registration, get another spot and bring in another body. Like you say, we need another 6 and another pure 8, I think, because Donnelly's more of kind of a more advanced 8 and a 10. That's it's tricky because we've got a new manager, and we'll talk about his appointment in a second. He mentioned in an interview with, I believe it was OUTV, that he's looking to bring in 2 more bodies at minimum. So still a little bit of work to do with still about 2.5, 3 weeks left of the window.
Yeah, about 3 weeks. Is it the 1st of February it closes?
I can never remember. It changes every year, doesn't it? I can never remember.
Right, just taking a look. Hang on. Closes 2nd of February at 7 p.m.
So, yeah, still a little bit of time, about 3 weeks, yeah.
Yeah.
So, in terms of, the major news, of course, was our new manager in the door. That, of course, being former Wycombe Wanderers player, manager, and also former manager of Colchester United and of Luton Town, Matt Bloomfield. So, buckle up, viewers. This is going to be a very interesting conversation because when it became clear that Bloomfield was the man, let's just say that Connor and I had a quite entertaining exchange in the group chat.
Yeah.
So let's do this. We'll get into the facts of this appointment. First of all, the official wording is that he comes in as head coach. The 41-year-old who's got 150 EFL games under his belt has signed on a 3-year contract, 3.5-year contract, and the usual kind of spiel has been put out by Ed Waldron and Bloomfield himself. So, first thing I think we need to address is it's taken 3 weeks for us to get to this point where Matt Bloomfield is the guy. It's reported, and Jerome Sale of BBC Radio Oxford said this, that Alan Sheehan withdrew from the process after it appeared that kind of the wind was shifting away from him. Though, of course, there's also been word from Sheehan's side that he didn't think the move was the right thing for this point in his career. So, first of all, Connor, on the process, and I think I am in this this group of people. The fact it's taken 3 weeks to get to an out of work manager, and it's not we'll say not a fashionable name, is deeply frustrating.
Yeah, how long did it take to appoint Liam Manning after Carl Robinson? Like, is this to my mind, this has happened before, that it's taken a fair few weeks to appoint an unfashionable, out-of-name manager. Mm-hmm. But I get what you mean. It's because after the last 2 appointments, we've had someone almost lined up and that we knew was an obvious target to go and get. So I'm not sure whether there's a bit of short-term memory there, but is it more because, do you think that there's more frustration from your side and from a lot of other fans? I should say that it's not the name that I wanted, by the way, and it's not glamorous. Mm-hmm. However, Is it because it's more of the name, where we could have been sat here 3 weeks later and say in an alternate universe, if we'd have brought in a Russell Martin, do you think that there would be this frustration?
I think
Is
possibly.
it because the name Matt Bloomfield is less than Russell Martin?
I think that's definitely got something to do with it. The fact that, like you say, in the closing days, we've been linked to, a Liam Manning return. There was 5 minutes where Will Still was at the top of the betting odds, which I think was, someone trying to mess with the bookies at that point. Russell Martin. Obviously, you go back to the start of the process, and guys like Mick Beale and Tony Mowbray were being talked about. So I think partially that's got to do with it.
Do you think that it's also... Sorry, I was going to say, mate, do you also think it's because now that where it was more of a collective decision, now it's an individual decision, in that it was Eric Tohir's final word? Because as he is... Whereas in previous appointments, his status in the club wasn't that he was outright majority owner. He was had a very large chunk, but there was still there was still Bakary, and there was still Tiger at some points as well that he was involved. Whereas now Thohir has complete control and complete final say.
Yeah. Possibly, obviously, George Ellick of the Not the Top 20 podcast. I think he reported that the decision had been with Eric Tohir since, I think it was just after the Swansea game. Correct me if I'm wrong, Connor. So that there was a fair amount of time had passed between that game and the final announcement on the day of the MK game. I think maybe like you say, the fact that there is now a single figurehead at the top of the club, and obviously there's a lot of frustration that's, and I think has been silently brewing under, in the background, at the fact that all, Grant Ferguson, the chairman and the owner are so often in Asia, and it's the perception that they are disconnected from everything going on at the football club. And, the only one we hear from on a regular basis is Tim Williams. Grant Ferguson, every now and then when he comes back to the UK, does an interview. I think maybe that's got something to do with it. Yeah.
Well, Jakarta's about 8-9 hours ahead, so there's a lot that has to go into, you'd imagine, from comms in that side. And I guess at the end of the day, they'll just say it's business, and sometimes these appointments and business deals and appointments, they take a long time, because unfortunately, whether we like it or not, this football club is a business for Thohir, and he's going to want a man to give him a decent return on his investment, which involves him keeping Oxford United in the Championship.
Well, that's another aspect to this, in the sense that obviously a couple of weeks ago on The Price of Football with Kieran Maguire, Tim Williams said that we don't mind if we go down, which I know in the moment did kind of ruffle a few feathers, because on the whole time that the stadium decision was pending, the club was adamant that we can't go down, we need to be in the Championship to build this new stadium, all that kind of stuff. And the fact that Matt Bloomfield has a 3.5-year deal sets this appointment out as, are they... It does seem to some, and including partially myself, that the club are going, we don't mind if we go down. We've got this guy for long term, and it will, we've got stability in that aspect, rather than, if we went down, probably Gary Rout would have departed, and we would have had to go searching for a new manager in the middle of summer.
Yeah, a 3.5-year deal. I think that this is more of a project appointment mid-season, when typically you do that in the summer. I believe that Grant Ferguson also in August or September, he said the same thing, that if we go down, then we go down. We'll still be on track to be where we should be in the next, I think their original target was in the next 2 years. So it would be the next the season after next to be in the Championship. However, when Des was sacked, he said that we're here in the Championship now and we're here to stay. So what's changed in the past 12 to 18 months for you to go back and Tim Williams to go back to go and say, if we get relegated, then that's fine. There'll be no head loss or anything. And if he says that, and that's all well and good saying that, but you've created a massive target on your back that you have to get promotion next season, the season after. Like, there is absolutely nothing. There's nothing that can save you if you said that, because with all due respect, we're not Birmingham City where Tom Wagner could say, if we go down, then that's on me, and then we'll get promoted next season, because even someone who knew nothing about football knew that Birmingham City more likely were at least going to get the top two. Whereas with Oxford, if we go down into League One, don't know about you, Sam, but looking at that league and looking at the players that we have, I'm not totally confident that we would jump straight back up. Or if we did, it would be a bit of a struggle. So, yes, with someone like Tim Williams, I'm not going to go over all of it again, my feelings towards him, but sometimes you think that he says things and it doesn't really chime with what I think that he's really trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, you go back to when they first took majority control. I think one of his first interviews, he referred to us as consumers, which was really not a good way to start the relationship with the fans. But let's go back to Matt Bloomfield, because I think we've spiraled a little bit onto the rest of the hierarchy at our football club. So that was one aspect of it, is the length of the process, I think, in terms of why there's a little bit of there's a lack of enthusiasm maybe about this appointment. The other is, not only is the name Matt Bloomfield, but everyone looks at his time at Luton last season and the first part of this campaign with Luton. Now, I'm sure, as we've already mentioned, as the EFL expert, you had a keen eye on Luton last season and the beginning of this term under Matt Bloomfield. And from what I've been reading in the days after, there were some aspects that weren't in Matt Bloomfield's control, and there are some problems at Luton that have carried over into the reign of Jack Wilshere. Obviously, the most successful time he had was at Wickham. Obviously, it was for Wickham fans, it was a shame that he was up against a free-spending Birmingham Wrexham side. But talk us through kind of the and kind of dissuade some of our worries about his time at Luton Town.
I think that with Luton, right, you've got to understand, compartmentalise that. Luton, I think that even when they got promoted, it was a bit of a shock to them, in the respect that of the size of the club that they are. And then they had this massive windfall, this huge amount of money that came in, and then getting relegated. A lot, I think, was more that because it was an ex-Premier League side and they had parachute payments, and a lot of people, including myself, thought that they would be challenging around the playoffs again, that they didn't expect it to be as tough or as hard as they did. And maybe that reality came in with a sudden crash and thud, because they also, like us, they had other projects that were going on in terms of infrastructure, like their stadium.
Yeah.
And then with Rob Edwards, I think that maybe just it's just been such a whirlwind that sometimes you can overachieve. So you can overachieve to such an extent that you're getting engrossed in the moment and in the task that you're in, that it just, reality, you go ahead of what reality is. But with Matt Bloomfield's case, coming into a side that was, I think it was almost around a year ago, a couple weeks ago to the year that Matt Bloomfield was appointed and came into Luton. And I remember, because I think one of his first games was against us, and they actually took the lead twice, and we went on to win 3-2. But you could see then, like, some of his ideas that he was doing, like, quite like attacking open play and wanting to be not like gung-ho or fully expansive, but giving attacking players a bit of freedom. And when he came into Luton, it took a while, like, because Rob Edwards was playing with a back five, he came in and Matt Bloomfield typically wants to play with a back four, but he couldn't because he had so many centre halves that he was kind of forced his hand to play into a back five, which didn't really suit his system. But once he got going and he got his feet under the desk, albeit a couple months in, Luton were actually one of the better. From March to May, Luton were actually one of the better sides in the league, and only Burnley and Leeds had a better points per game and were picking up more points than Luton. There was one game in particular, and I actually watched it back over either Thursday or Friday. Remember the Sunderland game when we stayed up? Yeah. It was that game, the game before Luton against Coventry. I remember watching it in the sports bar, Luton scoring.
Yes, I remember that, yeah.
In about the 89th, 90th minute, and we were thinking, okay, if Coventry can hold on, all we need to do is draw. And then Luton scoring, and thinking, oh shit, we're actually right back in it, and we're playing Sunderland now, so this is going to be difficult. But you could see, even though they were down to 10 men, the progressive thinking that he was trying to install into his team. And I think that is really something that we're missing at the moment. And he's said already that he's going to want to shore up our defense and get our shape right before we can do anything go forward, because like something that Sam Allardyce always says, you need to shore up your defense, and getting clean sheets is what gets you points. And I think we're at that stage already, and we're going to have to go layer by layer. And then going into League One again, because it's a team that has parachute payments in League One, is almost unheard of. But in recent years, you've got clubs like Sunderland who had those type of parachute payments, and bringing in the quality of player that they did for League One level, you would have expected a little bit more. But I think there was just so much going on behind the scenes at Luton that when you're looking for direction and you're looking for the higher ups, to give you some guidance and some structure, I think that he really wasn't given what he should have been given in order to operate effectively. What I would say is that I don't really think that Luton was a complete and utter failure for him. All right, he did get relegated, but on the one game of the season where he wanted his team to show up, they didn't show up. And that was when they got thumped 5-0 and ultimately got relegated. And I think they will take loads of experience from that and hopefully apply that experience to what he's done at Oxford. One bad episode and one almost bad job doesn't stain your entire managerial career or what it's going to be going forward. And he is still a very young manager.
Mm-hmm. And that's completely valid. Look at the man he succeeded at Luton, Rob Edwards. Obviously that time in the Premier League, obviously they were up against it, but comparatively pretty shocking. Gets the Borough job, does really pretty decent, and then goes to the worst Premier League side in history. So, like you say, one bad job doesn't mean that you've got a bad manager on your hands.
Respectfully, by the way, no one is turning down is there respectfully when it comes to Wycombe Wanderers? No one is turning down jumping from Wycombe Wanderers to Luton Town when Luton Town have parachute payments and they've just been relegated from the Premier League. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I was going to say another good example of that is look at Maurizio Sarri. Went from his terrible time at Chelsea and went on to pretty good things back in Serie A.
Yeah.
So the other thing about Bloomfield that kind of got me a little bit concerned, and again reading and watching a lot of other takes on this, is, and again it's another thing I want you to expand on, is his style of play. Now, Luton fans whose content I was watching yesterday were saying that under Bloomfield they saw 5 different shapes of to the team. He seemed to bounce between the style that they wanted to play. If you look back through his managerial tenure, obviously Colchester, speak to us about that. But obviously at Wycombe, he just succeeded Gareth Ainsworth, who had a very specific style. And from what someone from BBC Three Counties was saying, is that Bloomfield kind of continued that for a bit and then looked to try and implement some of his own ideas. And now when it came to the Luton job, There was a couple of explainers that that the Three Counties journalist kind of offered, is the fact he had 6 centre halves, and that he couldn't really set up in the 4-2-3-1 that he preferred. This is kind of the main thing, because it's the main reason that things started to really turn on Gary Rowett, is that his style of play was horrific. Have you got an idea of asking for the exact type style of play is a bit unfair, but a decent idea from the tenure at his previous clubs, especially, like I said, the Luton spell, where Luton fans, that I've read their pieces of, said that he played multiple different styles of what he wants to implement on a football team?
I do think that, as I said, I do think that he wants to play some type of, progressive football, giving attacking players some kind of freedom, but also having like a sturdy defense, which is, if you can do all of those, you're probably the best manager in the world, because at some point there's got to be a trade-off. Excuse me. But yeah, as you say, generally a 4-2-3-1. He likes to have a bit of intent. I don't think that is like what his predecessor was at Wickham in Gareth Ainsworth, and just hoofball, because Wickham were very effective, and if he was getting the likes of, say, for example, Kone at Wickham, he was getting him firing on all cylinders, and I think that is something that, and bearing in mind he was playing lowly in non-league, and I think that if we look at something like that, that is what Oxford fans want, because that's what, if there's a DNA to a football club, that's what Oxford fans, that's what we like. We like to see open, attacking, aggressive football, because, that's what we believe that we are. However, I do also think that we are going to have to grin and bear for a few more weeks, a bit more Gary Rowett football, in shoring ourselves up defensively, because that's, the obvious, the biggest issue at the moment of leaking goals. You said that at Luton he was playing about 5 different formations. I think that's because of, as we said, that he was he was so bloated in some certain areas that he was trying out what would work. I think that he was almost thrown into a quagmire of different players, but weren't really totally matching what he was trying to do. But in the end, those changes in formations towards the back end of the championship were working in some way or another, getting results. I can't really speak much to his time at League One level, because I think that, especially with the team that he had, even though there was probably issues going on at the moment, that he probably should have done better with what was going on there. But I think that it's going to be real interesting to see what team that he puts out, and how we're going to play come Saturday against, is it Bristol City on Saturday? But I think that the main thing is, as fans, we're going to have to be patient.
I do wonder with that. You mentioned we might have to grin and bear. I wonder how long that's going to last, given we've had to put up with it, half a season of Gary Rowett ball, of that style of football, and it's we saw that it didn't get results in the long run, and it was painful to watch. And like you say, we are a club that has a certain idea of how we think football should be played, and I'm encouraged to hear that he to go into Wickham and completely change the style of play they were that have been ingrained in that club by Ainsworth. And that being done by one of his ex-players, someone that was so ingrained in that system that they played it as a, on the turf at Wembley. But I think it's fair to, if you couldn't tell already, viewers, I'm very much reserving judgment a bit when it comes to Bloomfield. I think I'd said to you and Will in the chat, Connor, that I'm not going to immediately sing his name. Obviously, we will give him the backing. You do that as Oxford United. Any Oxford manager gets the full-throated support of this fan base. But if I can offer a little bit of advice to Bloomfield, do the basic stuff. It's something I know, if you go back through many episodes of this podcast, I'm sure we brought up a couple of times. Come over to the away fans, or to the East Stand after a game. It's the simplest thing imaginable, but it does so much to build your relationship and build a rapport with the Oxford United faithful.
Can I just ask you, when Des Buckingham was appointed, did you sing his name from the first game? Because arguably Matt Bloomfield had more credentials to manage in League One and Championship than Des Buckingham did.
Des is an unfair
No. I'm not. No. I'm not having because he's an Oxford boy and he's an Oxford fan.
Well, that was going to be my answer. That's not a fair. I'll tell you, I did have this approach with Liam Manning.
That's fair enough.
I held off a bit with Liam Manning, thinking, okay, what are we going to see? Because obviously, it come off the back of that MK Dons spell, but you can't compare Bloomfield, with Des. Des is, he's one of our own, only, one of only 3 managers to take him into the Championship. So let's calm things a little bit.
Just saying.
Are there any kind of any final things you want to put across when it comes to the arrival of Matt Bloomfield as our manager? Because obviously, like we've talked about, for the last 40 odd minutes, there's a lot of trepidation, and you'll see it with the new installment at Chelsea, that they become the conduit where all of the discontents surrounding those higher up will be directed. So whether it be the 3-week process to get to this point, he is likely going to have to weather a hell of a storm in his first couple of games as Oxford manager.
He more likely will do. The first 2 games of 2 home games, and I think that falls very kindly for him. Albeit Bristol City are a good team, but Queens Park Rangers, they have a few injury problems at the moment. But you're right in the fact that if it doesn't go well, I think that he'll be covered for, say if we get beat 3-0 consecutively on the bounce, I think that he'll be covered because, immediately it'll be, the job's too big for him, or he's not good enough for the job. And then fingers will start pointing at the board. It's, as you say, it's just that he's got to weather it. But I think as fans, I think this is where we had a little, not a spat, but we had a bit of a disagreement. My point that I was making over in the chat was, there's been positivity with the transfer window over the past 7 days that, the players, yes, they're responsible for what happens on the pitch, and what happens in the dugout is what is responsible. It's the responsibility of Matt Bloomfield and whoever his coach staff was going to be. But in the stadium, we have a responsibility to, when warranted, build on positivity and try and get it going. And if anything if say the players on the pitch, they're not putting in the effort, or if something goes horribly wrong in the first few weeks, try and keep a cool head. But then if anything goes wrong after that, unfortunately for Bloomfield and Tim Williams, I think fingers will start to be pointed, and we just need to make sure that it doesn't become toxic and that nobody panics very, very quickly.
So to round us off, obviously, like you mentioned, we've got Bristol City coming to town on Saturday. Talk us through what their form has looked like since we picked up 3 points at Ashton Gate. God, that feels like ages ago now, doesn't it?
I know, it feels ages ago. It literally does. That was back in the end of September, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. Bristol City. Well, they're a bit hot and cold, really. I think that they can't seem to string a decent run of results together. The last time that they managed to string 3 together was back in October, November. But they're a good team. I think. Yep. We can't even string 2 wins together. It's been almost a year, by the way. Gerhard Struber, I do like him as a manager. I think that maybe this year, if they don't get the playoffs, I don't think that they'll maybe get into the top 6, but they'll definitely be challenging right until the final hurdle. But you know what he's like. Usually he likes to have a bit of lightning football, and I think that we might be under the cosh for a fair bit at the Kassam on on Saturday. However, I think that our fans will be very up for it. I know that Bristol City lot will be up for it because they, for some reason, they're taking to us like Bristol Rovers. They have some inferiority complex to us lot, down the M4. So I'm excited. I'm not sure about you, Sam, but I'm excited that it's a new era, and I haven't been to the OX4 in nearly a month or 6 weeks. So I am very, very looking forward to this game.
Yeah, very much so. Am I right that obviously Mehmeti started off the season like a house on fire?
Yep.
For Bristol City, is he still the focal point of their attack?
I guess so. I mean, he's got 6 assists, 8 goals, but you also have Scott Twine as well, who's we all know that he's absolutely deadly from set pieces. So whatever you do, Oxford United, do not let Scott Twine have any coverage, have any free kicks to take within a 30-yard radius of your goal line. But in midfield as well, Jot Knight and Adam Randall as well. They're always engines in the centre of midfield. So, as I say, it's going to be tough. They have good players. I think any player that they have, they would be go straight into our starting lineup. As well as having, we should also mention, Sam, 2 players at the back line who we all know very well in Rob Dickey and Rob Atkinson.
I was going to say, if I can offer a bit of tactical advice to Bloomfield before his first game, chuck Sammy Long at right back and have him target the ankles of Twine and Sykesy. Well, that should give us the advantage.
Sykes last year pissed me off so much.
Yeah. Scored, went across and shushed the south stand, and then tried to clap us when it came off the pitch. Honestly, the fucking goal of the lad.
But, I know, it's where a lot of kids sit as well.
Yeah. It literally went right towards the family section of the fucking south stand. What a muppet.
Yeah.
But, like I said, Bristol City come to town on Saturday, and of course we'll be back with you on Sunday for another edition of Walking the London Road. Folks, I like to remind you of this every episode. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe. Really, really helps us out in the algorithm. And follow myself and Connor on Twitter at you can see on screen, and we'll see you next week.